Well, what a surprise. For the fourth year in a row, the NAR, National Association of Realtors, wants to be wrong again, and they've projected a 14% increase in home sales. And for those of you guys who haven't been following every year, I've been kind of quiet on the housing market, or I called the top in 2022, 2023, and said we were gonna see pain in the markets because things just are not affordable, or they haven't been affordable. They're finally starting to get affordable. And part of why they're getting affordable is because of the rent versus buy equation coming into balance. And when you start to have that balance occur in the marketplace where it's more economical to buy than it is to rent, or at least they're about the same cost, then people start looking at buying. And so they might be right this year, there might be more home sales, but they're also calling for an increase in prices. But the funny thing is, again, they called this in 23, 24, and in 25. There was I think one of those years, they were a little bit more realistic and weren't just putting out pro buy a house propaganda like they always like to. My opinion, I don't think their forecasts are gonna come true, and here's why. Like I said, they've been wrong the last 4 years. We have record inventory in most markets, and on a national basis, we have record inventory. Now, the truth is there's specific markets where we do have, less inventory. A lot of markets in the Midwest never bubbled up. Part of that is, no one wants to move to Cleveland. And so everyone's not rushing out of California to Cleveland. They're moving to places they were moving to places like Florida and Arizona. They're not anymore. Florida's had net migration loss for the past several years, which is part of why when you look at the housing data for Florida, prices have finally started to come down. Not as fast as I would have thought, but we're still down about 30-40% in a lot of metros, especially in Miami and Tampa and all the metros that bubbled up during the pandemic from people moving out of states like California and New York and headed for freedom in Florida. All that migration drove up housing prices. And so right now we're in a place where, the NAR just released this article saying that they're expecting home sales to increase 14%. And they were even saying, we think home prices are going to go up 6% this year, which I think is a joke. There's no way housing prices are going up that high, because last year we literally had the highest record on inventory that we've ever had in Denver. Same was true in several other markets. I believe Austin is one of those, as well as Tampa and Miami, if I'm not mistaken. But each of those markets have had pretty high inventory. But I know for a fact Denver's had record inventory, so has Austin, Texas. And so generally speaking, I think it's a good time to start looking at buying, mainly because we're coming towards equilibrium and we're in a very strong buyer's market right now because there's so many choices to choose from. I remember we bought in 2021 and there was very limited inventory. That was the last time we bought, because I've been buying from 2018 until 2021, and that's when I stopped, because in 2021 everything felt kind of unaffordable and like it was bubbling up. And then I saw prices peak in May of 2022 when the Fed actually started raising interest rates. And with interest rates at 6% right now, housing prices having come down 15 to 30% depending on the metro. Now, like I said earlier, the rent versus buy equation is starting to map out, at least on certain properties where sellers are more realistic. Because there's always, in every market, there's sellers that are just on crack, that will not lower their housing price no matter what people tell them, because they heard about their neighbor selling their house for, $1 million, and they think it was yesterday, but it was actually in 2020 or 2021. And it's just not worth that right now, because with interest rates, if their house was worth $1 million or at that same price, at 3% versus 6%, your payment, is 50-60% higher, and incomes have not matched that. We haven't had the same wage growth that we had from 2020 to 2021 with all the labor shortages. And right now we have some of the slowest job growth. In fact, we have job losses. In fact, I just put out a video recently where I talked about the job losses that happened in the past month in January, because there was a report that came out saying January jobs, there was 108,000 layoffs and there was only 5,000 new job openings added, which is terrible compared to what they were expecting. And so we'll see how the Federal Reserve responds to everything. But the National Association of Realtors is always going to tell you it's a great time to buy. They're always going to tell you that sometimes they keep it real, because the thing is when they're talking about forecasts, they're always rosy. But when they're talking about facts, meaning when they're saying here's what actually happened last month, or they're giving you summaries, they're a little bit more realistic and honest, because facts don't lie. They can't just make up shit when they're staring at the data and home sales are down again, home prices are down again, inventory's up again, meaning there's no buyers in the market, more sellers in the market. And the reason that's happening is because it's no longer affordable. And when they're writing those articles, those seem to be a little bit more factual. But truth is, when I'm talking to people, it's hard to buy, and it's been hard to buy for the past several years. It has not been a great time to buy. I remember I was watching a video from the Redfin CEO a while back, and he was talking about, they were pushing this propaganda of, you marry your property and date your rate. And the reason it's such bullshit is that if your property goes down in value 10% and you don't have at least 20% equity when you go to refinance, you're not going to be able to date the rate. You're not going to be able to get a better rate. And so what I'm advising people is that right now, what I think is going to happen is we're going to see housing prices soften again this year. I also think we're going to see more inventory come on the market again, or we're going to have similar record levels that we had last year, because we had an insane amount of inventory last year. And so, if we get the same inventory levels that we did last year, that would still be a historic level of inventory, which is going to keep prices suppressed. And because rates are still high, wages are not growing, the unemployment situation is not looking good. There's, people losing their jobs. People are not getting the wage increases that they need to afford these higher prices. But with interest rates coming down on the horizon, again, like I mentioned, the rent versus buy equation is starting to make more sense for buying, where it's, cheaper to buy, or it's at least the same to buy. And this is property specific, and this is also region specific. And like I said, I made a video about what it's like to rent versus buy in 2026. And so I'll link that at the end so you can see for yourself, as well as that video about what's happening in the jobs market right now with those layoffs, because that report was pretty intense. The fact that we saw 108,000 job losses. I mean, we haven't had layoff reports like that in a very, very long time. And so that is not bullish for the economy. And honestly, if you talk to the average American, to them, it'll make sense. And the reason it makes sense is because, cost of living has gone up. Everything's still expensive. It's starting to come down a little bit, but it still doesn't feel like it's affordable to get into something. And when you look at median priced homes being $400,000 or $500,000, I still think there's a little way to go on prices. And I've heard people say things like, oh yeah, prices need to come down 50%. That's not going to happen. I mean, I would love that. That would be really affordable. Even though I'm a homeowner, I mean, that would make things a lot more affordable. I'd be buying them up, even if they came down 10%, which is about what my prediction would be. Is I think we're going to see about a 10 to 15% further price softening. I don't think we're going to see much more than that. And the reason is because right now we're starting to come back to fundamentals in terms of affordability in a lot of markets, not in all markets, but because what happens is, you have two types of sellers. You have the sellers that are early and see the writing on the wall. Like if I was selling my home right now, I would price things at market based on what the house should be priced at, not based on what I think it's worth or what I want it to be worth. And then you have the second type of seller, and that seller is friends with Hunter Biden and they're on crack. And that seller is the one that wants a premium for their house. They want to get the same price that they would have got for it in 2021. They're not paying attention to where market fundamentals are. And they're just not realistic when it comes to what their home is actually worth. And so what happens is the sellers that are realistic in pricing their homes appropriately based on where we're at currently, those people end up setting the new comps in the area. And so when you go to buy a house a year from now or 2 years from now, what happens is the sellers that list then, realtors will look and say, listen, your neighbor's house, it sold 6 months ago and it sold for 500 grand. So I know you think it's worth 800 because you had another neighbor that sold their house in 2021 for 800. But right now your neighbor down the street sold for 500. It's a little smaller than yours. So, okay, yours is, worth 550. That would be market. That would be where we price it. And if you don't like that, then wait a few years. And the truth is that I think we're entering one of the longest buyers markets in history. And the reason is because we have a lot of boomers that are retiring and moving out of their old dated homes and starting to list those on the market. And so I think for the next 10 years, we're going to have a glut of inventory coming to the market, which means we're going to have suppressed housing prices for a while. It's going to be interesting for builders. I think this whole narrative that we've had in the past of there's, a fundamental housing shortage, that's going to disappear. All the states like Colorado or states like California that have really difficult laws in terms of laws for tenants and laws for being a landlord, where it's very difficult to be a landlord in the state, at least for residential property. Commercial's a different ballgame. There's no regulation. That's one of the reasons I like it, because you're dealing with business owners. It's a different. You're not dealing with people that, no one's trying to advocate for business owners. They assume you're a business owner, you're savvy, you can vouch for yourself and hire an attorney. But I understand the needs to take care of tenants and stuff, but a lot of the laws they passed in Colorado this year, like rent control and things that historically are not good for renters, and they're not good for buyers, because what happens is it suppresses new demand because builders don't want to build here, and people don't want to, when the government gets involved and they don't want to let the free market work and do the things that it should be doing and regulate itself, it's just not good for business, because people don't want to come in. It's more difficult to build here than it is in, Phoenix. And if they have a choice to build here or build in Texas or, build in California, they'll say, okay, we have the best laws and the best regulation to get it done quickly, in Texas and Phoenix. And so let's focus on those two markets, and we'll build there instead of in a market where, they need it. And so what happens is housing prices stay elevated in markets like Denver and, Northern California and Southern California. And some of that is just because of the fact that there's so many people in those markets. But the other part of it is that it's difficult to do business there. And so there's not as much new supply coming on the market. And it's basic supply and demand economics, and I'm all for affordable housing, which is why you need to reduce some of those regulations that make it difficult, which encourages the private sector to come in and put their money on the table, because they're taking a lot of risk when they're building. If you look at builders that finished projects in 2022 and 2023, they were sitting on a ton of inventory, and they were fighting all this other inventory coming on the market. And builders had a little bit more margin where they could cut their prices compared to someone that might have bought a few years earlier and might be upside down. And so really it's not as easy and cut and dry as just passing a law that says, oh, make housing affordable. Like, the best way to make housing affordable is allow people to make more homes, aka allow builders and developers to come in and do that, because that's going to increase the supply and it's going to make it more affordable for the average American. We should be able to produce small 3-2 starter homes for 150, 200 grand that they can sell for 250 to 300 grand, in these metros, and people can get into a starter home. But that's not happening, because why? They make more money building 4-bedroom and 5-bedroom houses. And so the starter home inventory that we need just isn't coming on the market because no one's building it. And quite frankly, I kind of understand why. You've got to look at the bottom line. You've got to make sure it makes sense, because if you can't make money doing it, you're going to go out of business, and that's just basic economics. So, but anyways, that's my 2 cents. Let me know what you guys think in the comments. Are you guys buying, or are you getting ready to buy in the next year or two? Are you thinking about it? Because I'm looking at the numbers, and like I said, things are starting to pencil, and I've made a couple videos talking about that. So those will be popping up on the screen here shortly, and you can check those out. And I'll catch you on the next one. Peace.